Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. And if this is your first time, we're glad to have you. And thanks for being here, joining us on the book study calls for the Transformative Leader. I have come to really cherish this time together because we are kindred spirits, and I really, again, appreciate your participation and your words of encouragement that you've sent us over the past few weeks. One thing I really want to start with is that I have, it has come to my attention that several people tried to log in last time only to be directed to the registration page. And I'm not sure what happened. We have tried to investigate. We're still kind of looking into it with Zoom, but I'm glad that some of you have made it. With others, we've sent messages to make sure that they can join us on Facebook. We are also going to be monitoring the comments on Facebook as well to make sure that we get everybody included while we're troubleshooting this issue. And so, again, thank you for being here, whether you're on Facebook or with us on Zoom or just calling in on your phone. Just a couple of housekeeping items that, and I see some comments coming in as well saying, glad to know I wasn't the only one. Again, my apologies. Something with the technology that it has, at least to our knowledge, was outside of our control, but we will try and make sure that we address that issue. So again, housekeeping items, you've got basically down below, you've got the Q&A box, you've got the chat box. As usual, Nassim will be looking at those. If you've got any technical issues or anything else, please feel free to put those in chat. Naveed, Nassim, they will also be working with you to address the issues. And I have one comment coming in right now. Let me see. John is saying, hello, I'm very much enjoying and getting a lot out of these sessions. Thank you so much, John. For some reason, I need to re-register every week. Is there a way that's supposed to work? Well, here's the thing. I'm not exactly sure if it is an operator error, as John says, or it is not. But here's the thing. What I will tell you is when you register, you get an opportunity to actually click whichever sessions you want to attend. So if you click all of those, you shouldn't have to re-register. But if you only clicked one, then you would have to re-register. So that is about what I know relative to re-registering. Otherwise, we know that we've had some technical issues with Zoom, and we're going to get to the bottom of it, I hope, very soon. Anyway, so aside from all of that, let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's conversation. And I tell you, today's conversation is so near and dear to my heart because the two chapters I'm going to cover today, one relative to 100% commitment, and the other one having to do with, if you can't run, walk. These two have been so instrumental in creating so many testimonials. And over the years, we've had people who've lost literally 60 pounds within a few months, and they related back to this particular lesson about commitment. We've had people who've had promotions, people who have restored their relationships, the important relationships in their life. So I cannot say enough about just how powerful this conversation can be. So I'm so glad you're here, and I would really encourage you to completely engage in this to make sure that you don't miss that moment when something is going to kind of trigger a thought for you, so you can actually take advantage of that and get that insight and go put it to good use. And I cannot wait to hear about your victory stories. Okay, so let me start with then the first lesson, and this is lesson number 7. On page 117, the title is, Do You Meet 100% of Your Commitments? Now, this particular topic is one of the 7 hidden saboteurs that I cover in my wildly popular program that I call Personal Transformation. This is a 4-hour session that, in fact, early on this week, I had with a group out of Vancouver, Canada, and we had such a blast. And in this conversation, what I do is I cover 7 hidden saboteurs that keep us from showing up as the best leader and best person that we are. And once you get to see those, and then I give you some habits and say, look, if you take on these habits, you get to overcome these saboteurs and really live your best life. And this is one of those. And let me give you a bit of context that's not really in the book, but some additional context. And that is about the value of integrity. Okay. And so what do I mean by integrity? I'm not talking about integrity in a sense of doing the right thing or the wrong thing. I'm just simply referring to integrity in the context of doing what you say and saying, when you say something, actually following through with it. And this is so important because what happens is, when you relate to yourself as a person of your word, when you give your word to something and you know yourself to be the kind of person who follows through, then you begin to gain credibility in your own eyes, if you will. Just like if you don't trust somebody else to follow through and they make you a bunch of promises, you're like, yeah, whatever, I don't care what they say, it doesn't matter. Well, you know what? We relate to ourselves the same way. If I make promises to myself and constantly not keep those promises, I begin to relate to myself as someone whose bold declarations don't matter. And what that does is that it really takes away from my power to boldly declare and courageously pursue. However, when I begin to relate to myself as a person of integrity, like, look, I have declared this to be the case. I have said this is the way it's going to be. And you know what? I know myself as a person who follows through, who has integrity, whose actions line up with his words. Then you know what? I know that I can take that to the bank. I go at it with a lot more confidence. So I always say that, if you don't really think of yourself as a person of integrity, you tend to play small in life because you don't want to take a lot of big risks because you can't count on yourself. But if you know of yourself, know yourself to be a person of integrity, then what happens is you make big promises and you go for it and you make things happen. And so that's where this lesson comes in. Do you meet 100% of your commitments? Now, I know some of you have been through this conversation with me. So you pretty much know the answer to this. You know the punchline. But let me ask you this. As I say in the book, do you meet 100% of your commitments? I want you to sort of just think about that. Perhaps you can put it in chat, in the chat box. I'll take a look here. Do you meet 100% of your commitments? Yes or no? Put it in chat. No. Okay. No. Got it. We're getting a bunch of no's. Okay. Got it. Not all the time. Got it. And this is what I get. This is typical of what I see when I'm in a room of 3,000 people. And I said, do you meet 100% of your commitments? Hardly ever anybody raises their hand. And then I raise my hand, as I have said in the book, and declare that I actually meet 100% of my commitments. I do. I meet 100% of my commitments. So, and actually Nicole brings up a good point that actually was brought up in the workshop that I had earlier this week as well. And she says, I basically meet 100% of my commitments to others, but not to myself. Okay. And Farzine also, who was in that workshop, says, yes, I meet 100% of my commitments. Okay. No cheating, Farzine. But anyway, look, here's the thing. I meet 100% of my commitments, and here's how I do it. Let me just explain in terms that I have described in the book on page 117 and 118. I bring up the example of how several years ago, my wife, Connie, my lovely wife, turned to me and said, look, I appreciate that you go out and make the money and all of this kind of stuff, and you're a great husband. Well, okay, maybe she didn't go that far, but anyway, but she said, look, you don't really help me out around the house. Can you do something? And so being sort of the guy that I am, of course, I was looking for some guidance. Sure, honey, what do you want me to do? But that was before I was enlightened to know that I was actually supposed to figure it out. That was the most important part. It's like, look, if I tell you, then that's not really a big deal. You figure it out. So I tried to figure it out, and I failed. And so she finally told me, she said, look, why don't you do this? I do the cooking. Why don't you clean the kitchen at night? And I felt liberated. I was like, okay, I know what to do. I can make that happen. And so I did this for weeks, and I was consistent. But then one day we had some company over, and I was going to go to work the next day early in the morning. So what I did was I just, went off to bed, didn't clean the kitchen, just basically, fell off the wagon, if you will, got off track. Next day I came home, nothing wrong. Everything is great. Kitchen is clean. And so I got back on, for a few more weeks. And then I missed again and again and again. And then finally I completely got off track, right? And so here's what I want to tell you, and this is what I want you to consider as well, that I want you to know that even when I was not cleaning the kitchen, when I had actually made the commitment to her, that I was still meeting 100% of my commitments. You see, the reason I say that is because the commitment that I'm referring to is not the commitment that you make to someone else. I'm talking about the commitments that you really have signed up for, like you really embraced it. See, I say I met 100% of my commitments even when I wasn't cleaning the kitchen, because even though I didn't meet my commitment to her, I met 100% of my commitment to myself, because my commitment to myself was to being lazy and doing as little as I possibly could get away with. You see, that's how I meet 100% of my commitments. And I want you to know that you meet 100% of your commitments as well. Maybe not the commitments that you say to others that you have. That I can agree. I don't either, and neither do you. But the things that you are truly committed to, you also meet 100% of your commitments. You see, the reason so many of you said, no, I don't meet my commitments, 100% of my commitments, is that if you think about it in the form of things that you say to others, sure, that's natural. But you have to understand, commitments come in 3 different categories. There's the 100% commitment. These are the things that you have actually signed up for. You said, I'm all in no matter what. And let me give you an example. If I have we had a couple of kids, and it's been a long time, but they were infants. Guess what? We were 100% committed to them. There were no conditions. There were no, like, I've done my part or anything like that. It's like we had no expectation of them. And it was our duty and our responsibility. If we had signed up for it, we said, look, I am 100% committed. So if they wake up twice in the middle of the night, that's what we're going to do. If they wake up 15 times, that's what we're going to do. We will do what it takes. That's 100% commitment. Then there's another form of commitment that's 0, right? 0 commitment. And these are things that you are very clear you're not committed to, and you've been very clear with others. You're not pretending like you're committed. You're like, look, I don't care. Whatever turns out, however that turns out, I don't care. I'm not going to get involved, and I accept the consequences. So that's 0 commitment. Then there's another category which we don't really think about. And this is what I call 50-50 commitments. These are partial commitments and conditional commitments. You see, I often talk about my exercise program that until a few months ago, was just kind of spotty, right? And I always say I used to be 100% committed to my exercise program. 100% on it. If the weather was nice and I got enough sleep and I felt like getting up in the morning, I was on it. And when I describe that, my commitment, you truly can see that I was not 100% committed. I was 50-50. I had a lot of conditions. However, you and I don't call those commitments 50-50. We don't call them partial and conditional. You know what we call them? we call them 100% if. I'm 100% committed to this project if these other knuckleheads do their part. I'm 100% committed to my exercise program if the weather is nice. I'm 100% committed to my people, to supporting the organization if I really get what I want. I'm 100% committed to my partner in my relationship if she is nice to me. You see, these are all conditions. And so that's why I call it 50-50. And these 50-50 commitments are out of stock due to high demand. You know, everybody wants those. And if you think about your commitments, you know, just a few months ago, I was at a session with a client of mine that I've been working with for a couple of years. And the president of the company sat there and said, you know, after we went through that conversation, I can honestly say that there's nothing in my life that I'm 100% committed to. And I have really, really gotten that. And he started really working through some of those things. So we have to be honest with ourselves and say, look, am I 100% committed to anything? And so what you have to understand is 100% commitments and zero commitments don't cause you any pain and suffering. They may require hard work if you're 100% committed to something. In fact, they will require hard work sometimes. But they don't cause you any pain and suffering because you simply do what you have to do in case of 100% commitment. And in the case of 0% commitment, you just don't care. It doesn't bother you. You remember we talked about passion and drama. There's no drama at all. But when it comes to 50-50, now this is where your pain and suffering comes from. And I would encourage you, if you are having a tough time trying to find a 50-50 commitment in your life, I want you to think about any commitment in any area of your life that you're struggling with. You feel like, man, I'm doing my part. They're not doing their part. Things are just not going well. I don't know what else to do. If you're struggling a little bit with a commitment, that's a 50-50, okay? And so the way you actually deal with that is that you simply make a commitment to yourself that there will no longer be 50-50 commitments in your life, that you treat commitment as a binary thing, as in like 1 or 0, 100% or none at all. And what that does is that you, first of all, you can go through the list of commitments that are causing you pain and pick one, just pick one and make a declaration. Do I want this to go to 0 or do I want to upgrade it to 100? And simply make a choice. If it's 100, then go right the wrongs that you've done and put the effort in and truly get all in. And if it's 0, then let it go. Go out and communicate to those people who perhaps have been thinking that, you know, you're somewhat committed, and clean it up. And there may be a consequence, because if you've been pretending like you're 100% committed, but you've been 50-50, guess what? There ought to be a consequence, immediate consequence. You know, so you made a commitment, you didn't meet it, so deal with it. Take the immediate consequence, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to be worth it. Why? Because all that frustration that you had as a result of your 50-50 commitments can now be turned into positive energy that can flow into your 100% commitments. Now, you may be wondering, you know, what if I go and tell somebody that I'm not committed to this thing that I've been kind of half-heartedly involved in? You know, I mean, they're going to be disappointed. I assure you, they're not going to be sitting there going, what? You're not committed? Because you know what? They already know. They already have figured out that you're not committed. In fact, it'll be a breath of fresh air for them to know that you also recognized it and you're willing to deal with it, because it gives you an opportunity then to negotiate another outcome. You see, so these are the things that are really, really important about 100% commitment versus 50-50. You know, a very sort of another demonstration of 50-50 commitment is that I put in the book is if parents were sort of partially committed to their babies learning to walk, you know, assuming that there's no physical disability, basically what we do is we work with these babies. We might pick them up 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, 100 times until they learn to walk. But if we were 50-50 committed, you know what we would do at some point? We would throw our hands up and say, well, I guess this one's going to be a crawler, right? But you don't see people crawling around, adults, saying, well, my parents gave up on me, right? Because that just doesn't happen. That's an area where we're 100% committed to do what it takes, not doing my part, but do what it takes. And so this notion of 100% commitment, if you truly embrace it, then the other thing that it does is that it not only helps you clean up your current commitments, but most importantly, it helps you examine what sort of commitments you want to make going forward. In other words, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you want to be involved in this? Do you want to do this? You want to do that? You think twice before you say yes, because you know yourself to be a person of integrity. If I give my word to something, then my actions need to line up. So then you think twice about saying yes. And in some cases, you might say no. In some cases, you might say yes, but not now. And in some cases, you say, yes, I'm all in. What can I do to help? You see, you begin to line your commitments up with this notion of 0 or 100, because then you are in full integrity. Because there's integrity in 100% commitment. There's also integrity in 0 commitment. You see, I'd much rather, I can tell you as a consultant, for instance, I have some clients that I'm in contact with, and we're kind of cooking stuff up and stuff like that. But then I have some clients, for instance, who call me like every 9 months or so. They're like really, really heavy and hot and heavy into like, wow, we ought to do this together. We ought to do that together. And then they kind of disappear. It's like, I'm like, I didn't come after you. You came after me. But a couple of emails later, then I'm kind of feeling like, well, maybe I'm bothering them. So I stopped. Then 6 months later, they come back and say, I tell you what, I'm so excited. We need to have a workshop. We need to do this. And you know what? For me, it's like, look, I'm going to continue to work with anybody. But at the same time, it's one of those things that people begin to not necessarily know where you stand and that sort of thing. So it's so important for you to be all in or none at all. And if you're not in, then communicate it. Now, I'm going to mention a couple of things that may be questions in your mind. And by the way, feel free to put comments in chat. I'll pause in a moment and take a look at these and review the result of the Q&A as well. There may be a couple of concerns for you right now, right? One is, look, I have multiple priorities. Like I've worked with a lot of clients, or I've got a lot of priorities and all this. How can I be 100% committed to all of them? Is that even possible? And I'm going to tell you, yes, it is. You see, 100% commitment doesn't necessarily mean you are in action right now on everything. You see, I have dozens of clients, and I've got things going on with them. But this moment right now, I'm with you. This is what I have carved out. This is what I have not communicated to anybody else that I'm available to them right now. And my phone is ringing. I'm trying to multitask and all this. No. So I can be committed to my family. I can be committed to my clients. I can be committed to my community and communicate what I can do when. So I may be 100% committed to you and your project, what you've got going on. But if I've already communicated ahead of time that, you know what, for the next 2 weeks, I'm not going to be able to do anything with that. Is that okay with you? So in 2 weeks, let's sit down and work that out. You know what? Then I'm in integrity because we worked it out. So communication is the key to having multiple priorities that you're 100% committed to. And that way you're not trying to run around and do a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, simply because you failed to communicate. The other thing that might be going through your head is, well, what if I'm 100% committed, but other people are not? Like, what do I do? I mean, do I just remain 100% committed, keep banging my head against the same wall? What do I do in that case? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. First of all, being 100% committed doesn't mean that you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. That's insanity, right? 100% commitment means if you tried a few things and they didn't work, you remain committed to the outcome, but you step back and you say, okay, what is that next step that I need to take? So that's 100% commitment. The other thing is relative to accountability and really holding, if you will, holding other people accountable. I truly believe that we cannot hold anybody accountable. All we can do is create conditions in which they operate in an accountable fashion. And you can do that while you remain 100% committed. You see, for me, 50-50 relationships don't work. If my wife and I have a 50-50 relationship, you do your part, I do my part, it doesn't work. And I ask people sometimes, I say, well, what is better than 50-50? And they almost invariably, I get this answer. They say 100-100 is better. I'm going to tell you, 100-100 is just as bad. And here's why. Because if I expect 100 from my wife and she expects 100 from me, the second she drops down to 99, I drop down to 98. Because I'm like, look, you were supposed to bring 100. What's up with this? And if my commitment is conditional based on hers, then I drop down, then she drops down, then I drop down. And let me tell you what works. 100-0 works. Okay, 100-0 works. And the reason it works is that I bring 100 expecting 0. That doesn't mean that I let you off the hook because you don't bring anything. Because if I hold you, if I care enough about you, I'm going to hold you, whether you're my teammate, you're my spouse, or whoever, I'm going to hold you to high standards. And part of my accountability and part of my commitment is to hold you to high standards. But you know what I'm not going to do? I am not going to allow your lack of commitment to degrade mine. And this is where 100% commitment comes in. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to actually go to the reflection questions and recommended follow-up actions. But let me just kind of quickly check. First of all, let me pause for a moment and see if Nassim has picked up on something that she wants to talk about here relative to the chat. But I'm going to also look at the chat comments as well. Nassim, you got anything for us?
Yeah. So Nicole says, thanks for the for the commitment at this very moment. I do think it's very important to ensure that communication on commitment, that it's very important when having so many priorities that we are committed to as leaders.
Very good. Thank you so much, Nicole. Appreciate it.
Ron has a question for you. He says, how does this concept relate to a situation where you have goals or objectives that are in conflict or circumstances that are in odds to each other?
Oh, this is a wonderful question. Why? Because most of the time, if you are up to something and if you've boldly declared something, you're up to a transformation. This is one that requires a lot of people to come together, perhaps different departments, different organizations even, right? And it's so important for us to align those goals. Now, it doesn't mean that we're all going for everything exactly the same way, but it does mean that we have common objectives. Now, each function, each person may also have some additional priorities, but those breakthrough priorities that we're going for, you know what? We got to align on that. So this is a really good point, John, because a lot of times what we do is we sort of brush it over to the side and we do our best, and then things don't go well, and then we go into our own corner and we talk about those other people. But in fact, the root cause of the issue is that we have opposing goals. So if we truly hold ourselves to 100% commitment, then we catch that sooner than waiting until it really is causing us big problems. And so if we hold ourselves to 100% commitment, we will raise a flag and we will work through those issues until we agree or agree to disagree or come up with some sort of a compromise that says, okay, this is our common goal. But it's absolutely necessary. Without it, there's no way around it. So I see Joy is also saying, how long do you allow the 100-0 commitment? How can we drive accountability sooner? Well, look, the 100-0 is actually not counter to accountability. 100-0, I believe, drives accountability like there is no tomorrow, because I'm not suggesting with 100-0 that you disregard the other person's lack of accountability. Just the opposite. I'm asking you to say, because if you are remaining 100% committed, and you know that part of your accountability is to make sure they act in an accountable fashion, you won't let them off the hook. The only difference is you're not going to reduce your accountability. You see, if you're not going for 100%, if you're going for 80%, 70%, if such a thing exists, that is when you let people off the hook. You know, I have people all the time tell me, they complain about their teammates. Well, you know, I can't stand that they do this, they don't do this, they say one thing, they do another. Well, have you talked to them? Well, you know, it doesn't do any good, whatever. No, it's a bunch of excuses. No, if you are truly 100% committed, then you maintain your 100 and you work with them to make sure that you work something out. So it's an absolute supporter of that as far as I'm concerned. See, Mark says, I'm a believer in balancing commitments. Another term is to keep all of the plates spinning. Yes, not an all or nothing approach. Why should we go for zero on a lot of the good things we are 50-50 on? Okay, so Mark, very good question, because I want to make make sure that this distinction is really clear. So I'm going to make a bold statement, right? 50-50 commitments are never okay in my mind, because what you're referring to is not a 50-50. It's a 0 or 100. It's just a matter of timing or scope. So I believe what you're talking about is, look, why should I say, no, I'm not committed to any of this when I'm actually committed to part of it? Somebody asks me to take on a huge project, but I'm not really committed to all of it, but there's only a part of it I can do. Why should I say 0? You make a great point. I'm not suggesting that you say no to all of that. What I'm suggesting is that you get real clear what part of that work you are truly going to be 100% committed to. And then negotiate that and be 100% committed to that. And be clear that you're not committed to the rest of it. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to just go to the reflection questions and follow-up actions for a moment, and then we'll catch up on the questions and chat comments as well again. So the reflection questions, basically what I'm asking you to do on page 120 is, you know, are there commitments that you have made that you have not followed through on? And are there results that you want to produce or relationships you want to improve that you've said you're 100% committed to, but now you realize that you've been conditionally committed to them? And so the recommended actions on page 121, really, if you go through these are so powerful. And I say this not because I wrote this book, because since then I've gotten so many wonderful comments from people around the results that they've produced in their life. So pick one result area that you're committed to delivering and list all the reasons that you've had for not being in action or not being in communication to deliver that result. Then make a choice and declare 100 or 0. And if you declare 100, essentially go take action, accept the positive and the negative consequences, and go from there. So if you do what these recommended actions say, recommended follow-up actions say, I assure you, you will have revelations in terms of what's going on with you that will make a difference for you. And again, I want to say as well, I love the questions and comments. I truly appreciate your participation here. So let me pause for another moment and see if there's any other question or comment that we want to address relative to this particular chapter before we move on to the next one. Nassim, you've probably scanned those a bit better than I have. So you got anything for us?
Not at the moment. I will say Naveed added a little bit of a response to your response to Mark. Would you like me to read that?
Yeah, so yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. I've got it here. And Naveed says, another reason to collapse 50-50 into 100 or 0 is that you can utilize the recovered energy from those conditional commitments to be used toward those things that you're actually committed to. And I think, yeah, and this is a great add here from Naveed. And again, I truly appreciate this question, Mark, because this is an important point that comes up for a lot of people, because we collapse the 0 and saying no to all of it. And what I'm saying is identify what part of this, on what timeline and what scope you're committed to, and then be 100% committed to it. And then for everything else, be clear you're not. Yeah. So Nicole also is saying, where does the responsibility fall? The person asking for the commitment or the person giving the commitment, or both? To me, it seems like candid conversations are key, both with yourself and the person the commitment is being made to or from. If I don't state that I want or need 100% of your commitment, then the onus is on me to provide clarity. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Nicole, for that, because there is a joint responsibility, right? First of all, I'm a big fan of making powerful requests, not just dropping hints and saying, oh yeah, it'd be nice if you could get involved with this, and then they're half-heartedly involved and you're disappointed. No, make a powerful request. Would you be willing to do this? And what are you willing to commit to? X, Y, and Z. But also on the receiving end of that, ask enough questions, understand enough about what the request is to powerfully say yes or no. This is very important, especially in relationships where one of the people is the other person's boss, right? So it's like, so how does that work? Because look, if I'm the boss, I know when I've been in leadership positions, I've always been, I've at least tried to do my best to not dictate a bunch of things. There's a percentage of time where, something needs to be done and I just simply need to deploy it, delegate it, and I'm not necessarily looking for your opinion. And that might be 10, 15% of the time, depending on what's going on, I may do that. But the majority of time, I am actually in your world and I'm saying, look, this is my idea. This is something that I think needs to be done. What do you think? And is this something that you want to get involved in? Is this something you're good at? And work it out. Because I want to make sure that, first of all, I don't set people up to fail. So I've got to sort of go to the right person who has the desire, the aptitude, the skills, whatever else, and maybe put a little stretch in it so that I can help them grow as well. So it's very, very important on both sides to be involved in that conversation. And Rosita says, how about when someone from our organization makes a commitment on our behalf that is not in line with our priority and goals? Another good question. Wow, this is so awesome, right? A friend of mine used to call that a mitment, because a commitment implies that the two of us were involved. But wait a minute, that feels like a commitment. You made a commitment on my behalf. Guess what? Here again, it really depends on you picking your battles, because sometimes if it's something small, I'll do it. If I know that I can carry it out and all of this, maybe I do that. And then I go back to that person and say, look, please don't do that to me again. We got to work through it. But in some cases, if you know that a commitment has been made on your behalf and you simply know that you're not going to deliver, then the best thing you can do is raise your hand and be straight about it and make sure that you don't get further into this hole by allowing people to continue to expect something of you when in fact you know that there's no way you're going to be able to deliver that. So these are all the things that we get into, but let me point something out. These are wonderful, wonderful scenarios that happen in real life. And let me tell you why these are such toxic sort of, they turn into such toxic scenarios for us, because we don't hold ourselves to 100 and 0. You see, because we allow ourselves to fall into this 50-50 category, we tolerate that somebody committed us to something. Okay, fine, I'll do my best, but obviously I didn't commit, so I'll do my part. But if it hits the fan, if it doesn't work out, I'm gonna be able to raise a flag and say, hey, you know what? I didn't commit to that anyway. Well, you know what? That's 50-50. If you hold yourself to 100-0, you work it out. And if it's like, if somebody comes to you and they're not truly engaging you in a delegation kind of process or whatever, if you truly are committed to 100 or 0, guess what? You're going to ask the right questions. You're going to engage in the right dialogue. Again, the root cause of all of the issues that we have relative to our commitment and the frustrations that ensue has to do with us not really embracing this idea that commitment is binary, is 100 or 0. So I would encourage you to take this on and really take it for a test drive from now on. And every time you make a commitment, ask yourself, am I 100% committed, all in? That doesn't mean I let other people off the hook, but that means I remain committed while I create conditions in which they operate in an accountable fashion. So again, I cannot tell you how important this particular lesson is. I really encourage you, if you haven't read it, read it again. If you've read it before, I don't know, read it again, watch this video, apply it, and you will see that it will make a difference for you. Now let me move on to the next lesson, lesson 17 on page 179. And the title of this message is, If You Can't Run, Walk. Okay, so you know, there's this the story that I tell in the book about how I wanted to become a runner. Like, I've never been a runner in all my life, right? I remember when I was in middle school, it was like I had this shortness of breath and all of this, and I used to, whenever there was like the PE activities or whatever were going on, I would sit in the room and they would give me a passing grade or whatever. I mean, this is literally true. One of my classmates is on this call right now. But anyway, so I grew up with this idea that I cannot run. And so I set a goal for myself. I said, I want to run for 5 kilometers, basically a 5K, without stopping. Now, I don't care how fast I go. And so my wife and I at the time were going for a run or jog or whatever every day. And, then, again, I would get off track, get back on or whatever. And then one day I noticed as we were walking that I was jogging and she was walking and she could keep up with me. Right? And right at that moment, the thought came to me. I was thinking, wait a minute, who are you fooling? I mean, you call yourself jogging? I mean, she's walking faster than you. What the heck kind of jogging is that? And so all these thoughts rushed into my head, and I noticed the same thing going on in my head that had happened 1,000 times in my life. I literally started to slow down and give up on ever becoming a runner. I thought, you know what? I'm jogging at the really slow rate anyway. It doesn't do any good. I might as well stop. Except this time I didn't do that. I kept jogging, like really slowly, by the way. And that was a breakthrough for me, because I really got to understand in that moment that the issue is not that I'm jogging slowly. The issue is that I'm using that setback as an excuse, and I'm going into my own head, and I'm using it as an excuse to not be in action. So that's the whole message of do what you can, and don't let your setbacks get in the way of you being in action, because we often use that as an excuse. Hey, you know what? It's not going as well as I wanted it to, so I might as well stop. So I say on page 181, it is what you do when those thoughts show up that make the difference. It's not that those thoughts show up. They show up for all of us. That little voice in the back of your head usually has nothing good to say. It's always trying to talk you out of being extraordinary. So when it shows up, what are you going to do? So I say on page 180, when it comes to conquering any kind of challenge in life, what is most important is not necessarily how fast you're going, but whether you stay in action or not, and whether you are pushing against the boundaries of your comfort zone. I often also present, when I'm presenting, I talk about this other idea that some of you may be familiar with. It's a familiar experience for me. If you are on a diet, let's just say you're not going to have any more sweets, and then a plate of brownies show up, right? And then you pick one up and you take a bite because you forgot you were on a diet, okay? You just took a bite and it was so good. And then you look at that brownie and you remember, you're like, man, I wasn't supposed to have any sweets. But you look at that brownie and you're like, well, you know what? Nobody's going to eat the rest of that. I don't want it to go to waste. I might as well finish that one. And then once you finish that one, you begin to have these thoughts. Well, I knew I wasn't the dieting kind. This is not working for me. Then you have 5 more brownies. You see? And what I'm here to tell you is it's not that first bite of the first brownie that did the damage. It's the next 5. So yes, you will have setbacks. Yes, you will get off track. That is the defining moment of your journey. That is the defining moment where you get to say, you know what? That was a mistake or that was a setback, but I'm getting back on. I don't care that I can't run. I can just go slowly. Today, in this global pandemic, you know, you could take an all or nothing approach. You know, from time to time, I feel like, man, I could just go and just give up on doing whatever I'm doing, just sit in a corner somewhere. And then I immediately catch myself, wait a minute, it's not about you. I'm the one, it's not about me. I'm out to make a difference. So what if I cannot talk to thousands of people at a time on stages around the world? Yeah, I can do something. I can hold a book study. I can do something that's going to make a difference for one person. You see? And so if you can't run, walk. Now, the one other distinction that I want to bring up is on page 182. Now, let me read this to you from the book. I say the key is to be committed to achieving the goal, but not attached to it. Now, let me draw this distinction for you. Again, the third paragraph there on page 182. Commitment drives you to do the best that you can, but attachment causes you to take your eye off the ball and be worried about the scoreboard when you ought to have all of your focus on winning the game. True commitment to winning compels you to play your heart out no matter what the score is. And if you do that, you increase your chances of being rewarded with a favorable score. Sure, it makes sense to keep an eye on the results, make course corrections as appropriate, and set strategies that will help you win. But that's different than letting your results to date diminish your best effort in the present. You know, oftentimes we look at how much progress we've made already, and we get disappointed because we're attached to that progress. We say, look, I've been working for the last 3 months. I've done this. Look at it. I have nothing. I've put these seeds in the ground and I've watered them every day for the last 4 weeks and I have no fruit. I don't even see any leaves. What the heck? So what do? We stop watering the seeds. We stop cultivating the ground. We stop fertilizing. We stop doing whatever we got to do, and we give up on it. And that is the definition of attachment. If you're attached to your results, it takes away from your commitment. And then rather than playing your heart out, doing whatever you got to do, you sit there and you worry about and you feel disappointed about whatever results you've already gotten or haven't gotten. And then guess what? It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay. So let me just say a couple more things, and then I'm going to pause. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box here and we'll address them. Let me read the bottom line to you. We often don't, on page 182, we often don't get in action because we're waiting for the perfect start. And at times, we stop because we're not making the kind of progress we think we should be making. The key to progress is starting exactly where you are and staying in action no matter how fast or slow you can go. You know, I give you a real life example from myself, a very recent one. So last week, as I mentioned, many people had trouble getting on Zoom and participating here. So as I was talking to you, I have to admit, you know, just being totally authentic and transparent, I looked down at the number of participants and I thought, wait a minute, we used to have like 100-some people. Why do we only have 58 people? And then as I was trying to be present with you and really truly get into your world and make a difference for you, part of my thought was about me. I was like, well, did I do something wrong? What's going on? Wow, do they not like my message? Why did they just laugh? Why did they just leave? Oh my gosh, we must not necessarily be doing the right things here. That noise, you know what? That's called attachment. You know what my commitment is? My commitment is to make a profound difference in the lives of people. If that's one person or if that's 10,000 people, they're people. And so today, like literally as I was getting prepared for this conversation, I thought, wow, what a great example that is of me becoming aware that that's working on me as we speak. It's like, look, last week I had this issue. And so I made a commitment to myself. I said, I don't care. If there are 3 people on this call, I don't care. I'm not looking at, that's not some kind of score. How many people did was I able to reach? No, it's about the commitment, not the attachment. So the reflection questions, and then I'll take some questions or comments. I'd love to hear from you. I love this group because we just have some great conversations. So reflection questions on 183, page 183. Are there areas of your career or your life where you have given up on taking any action simply because you don't see yourself taking action significant enough to make a difference? You're like, well, that's not going to make a difference. Are there plans you have put on the back burner because you're not sure if you're going to be great at executing them? Are you holding off on starting something because you are waiting for the perfect start? And finally, have you allowed your disappointment in your results in any area to cause you to not do what you know in your heart you ought to be doing? If that's the case, let some of that stuff go. If you can't run, walk. It's okay. It's just about not stopping. It's about getting going wherever you are and staying in action, even if you can go slowly. So the recommended action steps that I have for you is, this is a very practical set of steps. Write down the answers to these questions and identify 1 or 2 actions that you know you should be taking to achieve the goals you have set for yourself. Now, you may avoid doing this because you don't want to confront yourself with it. That's fine. That's entirely up to you. But what I'm going to tell you is, if you sit down, instead of getting overwhelmed with, oh, my life is messed up and this and that, no. Take 1 or 2 actions that you know you need to take. Don't get overwhelmed by the entire journey. Just take 1 or 2 actions and make it happen. Right? Make a commitment, going back to commitment. Make a commitment, as in 100%, that you will get in action and stay in action whether you see any results or not. Whether you see any results or not. You see, how many of us have started an exercise program and 10 days later, we look in the mirror and we're like, wow, I'm not Mr. Universe or Miss Universe yet. I might as well give up. No, it's amazing how we go for 30 years without exercising and find out that all of a sudden, after 30 years, we're not in shape. But then we exercise for 2 weeks and we're like, I'm not in shape yet, and I've been exercising 2 weeks. No, I don't care that you're not getting the results. Get in action. Identify the specific action you will take and the date by which it will be completed, and declare your intentions to someone who will hold you accountable, an accountability partner, to doing what you said you would do and help you celebrate when you accomplish your goals. So these are my suggestions to you, and I believe that if you take these 2 lessons to heart, they will make a profound difference for you. So let me stop for a moment and see if we have any questions or comments. Yeah, Nicole ended up, I know they've got another call, and Nicole's group, by the way, is really great as well. They put on some really great webinars. Any questions or comments from anyone at this point? Are you all in deep thought here, or what's going on? So talk to me. All right, so John, I see the chat as well, and the same. So John is saying, what is your advice or interpretation of don't make the perfect the enemy of the good versus the concept of you have to say no to the good so you can be great? So look, both of these concepts, I actually am a huge, fan of, if you will, because these are two concepts that go hand in hand. Okay. So first of all, don't make, let's start with the second one. No to the good so you can be great. Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, says good is the enemy of great. Because sometimes what happens is we settle for what is good and we say, yeah, it's not bad enough for me to do anything. We settle for good instead of going for great. So to me, that second sentence says that, don't just settle for good, go for great. However, the first sentence you're talking about, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. What that says to me is what I'm shooting for. Okay. And what the conditions that I look for to get started. Oftentimes we don't start something because we project that we're not going to be perfect, that it's not going to be the perfect thing. And you know what? That is when that applies. It's like, look, don't worry about that. Go ahead and get started. So for me, it's like, you know what? Go for great and don't allow your perfectionism, if you will, to stop you from getting started. So that's sort of how I reconcile that for myself. And I appreciate that, John. And if you got anything else that you want to say about that, we'll welcome that. All right. So Jagan says, thank you for making me realize I'm not 100% committed. One of the things that one of the things that I was working on, I am going to get on the wagon and keep it going, even if it's walking and not running. Perfect, Jagan. Really, really great. And that's the whole point of this conversation, right? It's not the concept. It's like, yeah, this is the concept. Many of us already know this concept, but it doesn't do you any good unless you act on it. So think about what's going on with you. Do you realize something? And just like Jagan said right now, and if you do, what are you going to do with it? Act on it. And Farzin says, I found the challenge is to continue with the action despite not seeing the results you were anticipating. So true, because often what we do is we take some action and we have expectations. And when those expectations are not met, especially on a particular timeline that we had in mind, then we give up, right? And this is a challenge. And you know what? I have a blog post on this about, I believe it's called something like how your goals are sabotaging your progress or something like that. And in that blog post, what I suggest is that you set goals, go for the gusto, set really big goals for yourself, but then set them aside. Set big goals, figure out what you're going to do to make it happen, and from time to time revisit to make sure you have the right strategy, but then set it aside. Don't go for it every day expecting the goal to have been achieved. Once you identify what action you need to take, then focus on your action, not your goal every single day. All right, and Rosita says, I tend to be great in time of crisis or deadlines and don't seem as motivated when things are routine. Do I need to create a crisis to be great? Really great. I think most of us do that, right? The day before a vacation, we get so much more done than the previous week combined. And the reason for that is simply because we hold ourselves to high standards. We are working towards something that's important to us. It's like, look, if I don't get this done, then I don't get to go on my vacation. So yes, it is important for us to kind of create a crisis for ourselves. The crisis doesn't mean you have to run around like a chicken with your head cut off. It just could mean that, look, it is so important that I get this done. I set my own deadlines as opposed to deadlines that are imposed upon me. Right? And Haya, we've got, so any thoughts or advice on committing to your true self versus attaching yourself to the thoughts of others and how they may perceive you? I could not say enough about that. I think this is such an important point that you have to be true to yourself. Yes, I get that it's important for us to listen to our spouse and our children and our parents and our bosses and our co-workers and all of that. But at the end of the day, if you are not willing to commit, then don't, and be straight about it. Okay? But it's so important for you to be willing to do that. And sometimes, by the way, we commit because that person is important to us. everything that my wife wants me to do may not be important to me personally, but because she is important to me, then that thing is important to me. You understand? So that's the case. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you again. Thank you all for this conversation. What I'm going to do now, it's about 11:59. So what we're going to do is I'm going to stop the recording right now.